For Titan of Industry, Alaric Thorne, it was a moment of casual, satisfying cruelty. Standing on a sunlit street corner with his beautiful mistress draped on his arm, he openly mocked a pregnant musician playing for spare change. With a dismissive laugh, he flicked a few coins into her violin case, an act of charity that was purely an exercise in contempt. He believed he was untouchable, a king scorning a peasant. But in his blinding arrogance, he missed two crucial details. He didn't see the pack of photographers hiding in plain sight, their lenses trained on him like sniper rifles. And he failed to recognize the broken woman he had just humiliated as his own wife. The air in the penthouse apartment atop San Francisco's Millennium Tower was so sterile it seemed to hum with a life of its own. It was the sound of money of air purifiers working overtime of silence bought and paid for. Amelia Rosemont Thorne breathed it in, and it felt like she was suffocating. She stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city sprawling below, a vibrant, chaotic tapestry of life that felt 1,000,000 miles away. Her husband, Alaric Thorne, stood behind her, his reflection a sharp, imposing silhouette in the glass. He adjusted the knot of his silk tie, his eyes not on her, but on his own powerful image. The navy blue Chanel. I think, he said, his voice smooth and commanding. It wasn't a suggestion. It compliments your eyes, and it sends the right message for the Whitman Gala. Amelia didn't turn. I was thinking the silver one. A beat of silence. The hum of the apartment seemed to grow louder. The silver one is ostentatious, Amelia. It says new money. We're past that. We're past that. The words hung in the air, a familiar ghost. Alaric had built Thorne Industries from the ground up, a technology and logistics empire that had devoured its competitors. But he'd also meticulously crafted a new identity for himself, burying his own modest blue-collar upbringing in Ohio under layers of Savile Row suits and ruthless business acquisitions. He wasn't just a rich man. He was an aristocrat of his own making, and Amelia was his most prized acquisition. He had found her 5 years ago, a brilliant Juilliard-trained violinist, playing with a string quartet at a stuffy corporate event he was forced to attend. He'd been captivated not just by her beauty, but by the raw, untamed passion in her music. It was a passion he sought to possess, to tame, to put on display in his perfect world. He had swept her off her feet with a whirlwind romance that felt like a fairy tale. Now it felt like a prison. The violin he had once admired, a beautiful 18th-century Testor he'd bought her as a wedding gift, now sat in its velvet-lined case, a silent rebuke in the corner of their sprawling living room. He called it Ophelia, a beautiful but tragic thing. He loved telling people the story of its purchase, but the idea of her playing it, especially the soulful, melancholic folk tunes from her childhood in rural Oregon, seemed to embarrass him. It was too raw, too unrefined, too much a reminder of the woman she was before she became Mrs. Thorne. Fine, Amelia, said her voice flat. The navy blue. He came up behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders. They were heavy, proprietary. He kissed the top of her head. That's my girl. We have to present a unified front. Image is everything. His phone buzzed. He pulled it out, his thumb swiping across the screen. A small, self-satisfied smile played on his lips. Amelia knew that look. It was either a business victory or a message from Chloe Sterling. Chloe Sterling was a public relations powerhouse, a woman as sleek and sharp as the glass tower she worked in. Publicly, she was Thorn Industries' indispensable PR guru. Privately, and Amelia knew this with a certainty that was a cold, hard stone in her stomach, she was Alaric's mistress. Amelia had seen the late-night texts he thought he'd deleted, smelled the faint, cloying scent of Chloe's perfume on his suits after late board meetings. She had confronted him once, months ago. His reaction was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. He hadn't shouted. He had laughed. A soft, pitying laugh. He'd called her insecure, emotional, and ungrateful. He'd painted her as a hysteric, cracking under the pressure of the life he'd so generously given her. He'd made her feel so small, so foolish, that she had retreated, the unspoken truth festering between them ever since. Now a new secret was nestled within her, one that filled her with both terror and a fierce, primal protectiveness. She was 8 weeks pregnant. She hadn't told him yet. How could she? How could she bring a child into this cold, polished mausoleum? A child who would be raised to believe that image was everything, that genuine emotion was a weakness, and that love was a transaction. The thought horrified her. The baby was her secret, her anchor, the one thing that was purely hers. Later that day, while Alaric was at his office reshaping the city's skyline, Amelia found herself drawn to the violin case. She opened it, the scent of old wood and rosin filling her nostrils. It smelled like home. Her fingers, soft from disuse, traced the elegant curves of the instrument. She remembered the girl she used to be, the one with calluses on her fingertips and a fire in her soul, who could lose herself for hours in a Bach partita or a fiery Celtic reel. Where did that girl go? A reckless idea began to form a tiny spark of rebellion in the vast emptiness of her life. It was crazy. It was dangerous. But it was also the only thing that felt real. She needed to know if that girl was still in there somewhere. She needed to breathe real air, to feel a real connection, to play her music, not for applause or prestige, but for the sheer, unadulterated joy of it. She went to a closet in the guest wing, one Alaric never looked in. She pulled out a box of old things she'd stubbornly refused to throw away. Inside was a pair of worn jeans, a faded grey hoodie, and a pair of scuffed-up boots. They felt more like her skin than the designer dresses that lined her walk-in closet. The plan was simple and terrifying. She would take the subway, something she hadn't done in years. She would go to a public place, a place teeming with the kind of life Alaric despised. And she would play. Not as Amelia Rosemont Thorne, the billionaire's wife, but as a nameless musician, just a girl and her violin. It wasn't about the money. It was about reclaiming a piece of her soul. She looked at her reflection, at the perfectly coiffed hair and the haunted eyes. Tomorrow, she wouldn't be this woman. Tomorrow, she would see if Amelia Rosemont still existed. And in doing so, she would unknowingly set the stage for a collision of her two worlds, a public spectacle so devastating it would bring Alaric Thorne's carefully constructed empire crashing down around him. The following morning was a symphony of deception. Alaric left early, kissing a distracted Amelia goodbye before heading off to a high-stakes merger negotiation. "Don't forget your fitting for the gala dress at 2, he'd reminded her, his mind already on spreadsheets and share prices. The moment the heavy penthouse door clicked shut, Amelia's charade began. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and exhilaration. This was more than just skipping a fitting. It was an act of treason against the kingdom of Thorne. First, the disguise. She couldn't risk being recognized. She pulled her lustrous auburn hair back into a tight, severe bun and covered it with a cheap, mousy brown wig she'd bought online weeks ago, a purchase made with a prepaid card and delivered to a private mailbox. The synthetic fibers felt itchy and foreign. She smudged a bit of dark makeup under her eyes, creating the illusion of sleepless nights of a weariness that in truth wasn't entirely feigned. She traded her silk pajamas for the old jeans and hoodie. The final touch was a pair of non-prescription glasses with thick, unflattering frames. Looking in the mirror was a jarring experience. The woman staring back was a stranger, drab, invisible, and worlds away from the polished socialite whose picture occasionally graced the society pages. She was perfect. The most difficult part was smuggling Amelia out. The violin case was too distinctive, too elegant. She carefully wrapped the precious instrument in layers of old, soft towels and placed it inside a battered canvas duffel bag, along with a collapsible music stand and a small, foldable stool. It felt like sacrilege, but it was necessary. Navigating the building's service elevator, a place she'd never been, felt like entering another country. The air was thick with the smell of cleaning supplies and cooking from the staff kitchen. She kept her head down, her body tense, expecting a hand on her shoulder at any moment. But no one gave her a second glance. In her drab disguise, she had achieved the one thing a billionaire's wife never could: anonymity. The subway was a sensory assault. The screech of the wheels, the crush of bodies, the cacophony of a dozen conversations. It was overwhelming and strangely thrilling. It was the chaotic, messy pulse of the city she had been insulated from for so long. She clutched the duffel bag to her chest, the shape of the violin a secret comfort. The baby inside her gave a faint flutter, or perhaps it was just her own nerves. Either way, she placed a protective hand over her stomach. "We're doing this together," she thought. She chose Presidio Square, a place known for its bustling mix of office workers on their lunch break, tourists with cameras, and students from the nearby art college. It was open public and brutally indifferent, the perfect proving ground. Finding a spot near a fountain away from the more aggressive performers, she unpacked her meager setup. Her hands trembled as she assembled the flimsy music stand and placed the violin in its open empty case on the pavement, before her a silent plea for donations. Her real case, the velvet-lined one, was a symbol of her gilded cage. This empty, battered canvas was a symbol of her desperation. She took a deep, shuddering breath and lifted the violin to her chin. The familiar weight was reassuring. For a moment she panicked. What if she couldn't play anymore? What if the music was gone? Smothered by years of silence, she closed her eyes, shutting out the curious stares and the hurried footsteps. She didn't think about Alaric or the gala or the penthouse. She thought about the forests of Oregon, the scent of rain on pine needles, the way her father used to hum old folk tunes while he worked in his woodshop. And then she played. The first notes were hesitant, a little shaky. It was a simple, haunting Irish lament, a tune called To the Parting Glass. It was a song of farewell, of leaving something behind. The melody, melancholic and sweet, curled into the city air. Something shifted. The tightness in her chest began to loosen. The stiffness in her fingers melted away. The music wasn't gone. It had been waiting dormant, a river frozen under ice. Now the ice was cracking. A few people slowed their hurried pace. A woman pushing a stroller paused. A young man with headphones pulled them down, tilting his head. They weren't looking at a socialite or a billionaire's wife. They saw a pregnant woman in a cheap wig, pouring her heart out through 4 strings. They heard the sorrow and the hope woven into the melody. Her confidence grew. She transitioned from the lament into a fiery, complex Bach chaconne, its intricate arpeggios and powerful chords echoing off the surrounding buildings. Her bowing became more assertive, her fingers flying across the fingerboard. This wasn't just playing, it was a declaration. I am here. I am Amelia. A young girl no older than 7 broke away from her mother and sat cross-legged on the pavement a few feet away, her chin resting in her hands, utterly mesmerized. A businessman in a crisp suit, who had been striding past with a phone pressed to his ear, stopped mid-sentence. He lowered the phone, his conversation forgotten, and simply listened. The empty violin case was no longer empty. A crumpled dollar bill appeared, then another. A tourist dropped in a handful of coins that clattered loudly. An old woman smiled kindly and placed a $5 bill inside. The money meant nothing and everything. It wasn't charity. It was an acknowledgement, a connection. Each coin was proof that her music, her true self, had value in the world outside Alaric's sterile penthouse. For nearly an hour, she played. She played until her shoulders ached and her brow was damp with sweat. She was exhausted, exposed, and happier than she had been in years. The small crowd ebbed and flowed, but a core group remained a silent, appreciative audience. She felt a warmth spread through her, a stark contrast to the cold stone that usually resided in her gut. She was Amelia again, the girl with the violin. She was so lost in this music, so immersed in this fragile, beautiful moment of reclamation, that she didn't notice the sleek black limousine that had pulled up to the curb at the far end of the square. She didn't see the 2 figures who emerged, their expensive clothes, a jarring contrast to the everyday scenery. And she didn't know that the man who had imprisoned her soul was about to stumble upon her desperate, beautiful act of freedom. Alaric Thorne despised public spaces. They were inefficient, dirty, and filled with the uncurated masses. He was, however, making an exception. Chloe Sterling had insisted on lunch at Le Ciel, a ridiculously exclusive rooftop restaurant overlooking Presidio Square. It was the kind of place where deals were made over $500 bottles of wine, and being seen was the main course. "The Whitman merger is all but signed," Alaric said, swirling the deep red liquid in his glass. Their board folded like a cheap suit. They knew they couldn't compete with our new logistics algorithm. Chloe, seated opposite him, looked radiant. She wore a crimson dress that was both elegant and audacious. She reached across the table and placed her manicured hand over his. "There was never any doubt, darling. You're a shark." They were minnows. Her voice was a low purr, a carefully calibrated mix of admiration and ambition. "And Amelia?" Chloe asked a casual, calculated question. "Is she behaving all set for the gala?" Alaric sighed, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "She's being Amelia, moping about something or other. She had a fitting today for the dress we chose. Probably staring out the window, looking tragic. Honestly, the woman could find melancholy in a winning lottery ticket. She just doesn't appreciate what she has," Chloe said, her tone sympathetic, but with an underlying edge of contempt. "What you've given her." "Exactly," Alaric affirmed, his ego soothed. "I gave her the world. All she has to do is live in it and look beautiful. It's not a difficult job." Their lunch was a symphony of mutual adoration and power brokering. As they left the restaurant, descending in a private glass elevator, Chloe looped her arm through his. "Let's walk through the square," she suggested, gesturing towards the sunlit plaza. "Let the common folk get a glimpse of greatness." Alaric, buoyed by the wine and the successful merger, agreed. It was a fine day, and the thought of striding through the city like a modern-day emperor appealed to him. They strolled along the path, a bubble of wealth and privilege moving through the sea of ordinary people. It was the music that caught his attention first, a violin. The sound was surprisingly clear, cutting through the city's ambient noise. It was a sad, soulful tune that, for a reason he couldn't pinpoint, irritated him. It was the music of the gutter, full of unrefined theatrical emotion. "God, listen to that," he muttered to Chloe, a sneer twisting his lips. "Someone's begging for their dinner." They drew closer, following the sound. They saw a small crowd gathered around a fountain, and in the center of it, a woman. She was a pathetic sight in his eyes, a shapeless hoodie, a terrible wig, and the unmistakable swell of a pregnancy under her clothes. She was hunched over her instrument, playing with a desperate intensity that he found distasteful. An open violin case with a few pathetic dollars and some loose change lay at her feet. From Amelia's perspective, the world had been a blur of joyful focus. She was just finishing a piece, her eyes closed, savoring the final, vibrating note. When she opened them, blinking back to reality, she saw them. The world tilted on its axis. It was as if a switch had been flipped, plunging her from a warm, sunlit dream into a freezing nightmare. Alaric and Chloe, standing not 20 feet away, looking directly at her. Her blood ran cold. Panic, stark and absolute, seized her. Her first instinct was to run, to pack up her things and disappear into the crowd. But she was frozen, pinned by his gaze like a butterfly to a corkboard. He hadn't recognized her. Not yet. The disguise was holding. But the look on his face, it was pure, unadulterated disgust. Alaric turned to Chloe, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Look at that. Pregnant and playing on the street. Some people have no shame, probably trying to get a few extra sympathy bucks with the baby bump." Chloe laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "It's tragic, really. What's her sob story, do you think bet the father ran off the second he heard the news?" They started walking towards her. Each step they took was a hammer blow to Amelia's heart. This couldn't be happening. Of all the people in the city on this one day, it had to be them. She kept her head down, her face shielded by the wig and the frames of her glasses, praying they would just pass by, but they stopped right in front of her. The scent of Alaric's expensive cologne and Chloe's perfume enveloped her, a suffocating cloud of their world invading hers. She could see his polished alligator skin shoes that cost more than her father had made in a month. She didn't dare look up. "Quite the racket you've got going here," Alaric said, his voice dripping with condescension. He looked down at the handful of bills and coins in her case. "Doesn't look like business is booming." Amelia's knuckles were white where she gripped the neck of her violin. She wanted to be sick. This was her husband, the father of her unborn child. And he was looking at her, at his own wife and child, with nothing but contempt. Chloe chimed in, her voice like shards of glass. "Maybe you should try a happier tune, dear. You might attract a better class of clientele." Then Alaric did something that shattered the last vestiges of Amelia's hope. He reached into his pocket, not for his wallet, but for his loose change. With an exaggerated theatrical air of magnanimity, he picked out a few coins. "Here," he said, his voice loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "Let a real patron of the arts help you out." He didn't place the coins in the case. He flicked them. They spun through the air and landed with a series of cheap, tinny clinks inside the canvas case. One of the quarters struck the varnish of her precious violin, the instrument he had gifted her, with a sharp tink. The sound was louder to Amelia than a gunshot. It was an act of such profound, casual cruelty that it stole her breath. Humiliation washed over her, hot and sickening. A single tear escaped her eye and traced a path down her cheek. She still didn't look up. She couldn't. If he saw her eyes, he would know. Alaric chuckled, satisfied with his little performance of charity and scorn. "Come on, Chloe. We'll be late." He turned, putting a proprietary arm around Chloe's waist, and they began to walk away, two glamorous figures leaving the street performer to her squalor. They were smug, triumphant, completely unaware of the bomb they had just armed. For in his arrogance, Alaric had failed to notice two things. He failed to notice the small, almost imperceptible tremor in the performer's hand as she clutched the violin. A tremor of recognition and rage. And he failed to notice the man in the drab grey jacket leaning against a newsstand across the square. The man who had been watching not the performer, but Alaric Thorne. The man who was now lifting a professional-grade camera with a long telephoto lens to his eye. The man who had just captured the entire ugly exchange. And he was not alone. From doorways and behind park benches, 3 other figures with cameras emerged, moving not with the slowness of tourists, but with the predatory speed of the paparazzi. They weren't there by accident. They had been waiting for a story, and Alaric Thorne had just handed them the scoop of a lifetime. As Alaric and Chloe walked away, a cloud of self-satisfaction enveloped them. They were the victors, the beautiful and the powerful, casting a brief, disdainful glance back at the dregs of society. For Alaric, the encounter had been a minor amusement, a way to reinforce his own superiority. For Amelia, it was the final, brutal severing of a bond she now realized had been an illusion all along. The coin striking her violin wasn't just an insult. It was a desecration. She finally lifted her head, hot tears blurring her vision to watch them go. The image of his arm around Chloe's waist was a knife twisting in her gut. The king and his chosen queen abandoning the peasant. It was then that the world erupted. Alaric Thorne! The shout was sharp and professional, cutting through the square's gentle hum. It wasn't a fan or a heckler. It was a summons. Alaric and Chloe stopped turning in surprise. A man in a simple jacket, the one Amelia had vaguely registered leaning against the newsstand, was striding towards them. But he wasn't alone. As if on cue, other figures detached themselves from the scenery. A woman stepped out from behind a large planter, a long-lens camera already clicking. A man who had been pretending to read a newspaper lowered it to reveal a video camera resting on his shoulder, its red recording light glowing like a malevolent eye. Within seconds, a half-dozen of them were swarming a pack of wolves closing in on their prey. Flashes erupted, a blinding, disorienting strobe effect that made Alaric flinch. Microphones and smartphones were thrust towards his face. "Mr. Thorne, Ben Carter, from the San Francisco Chronicle. A quick word," the first man called out, his voice calm but relentless. Alaric was momentarily stunned. He was used to press, but this was different. This wasn't a controlled press conference. This was an ambush. He instinctively put on his public face a mask of charming annoyance. "Gentlemen, ladies, I'm on a private lunch," he said smoothly, trying to steer Chloe away. "You'll have to go through my PR department." But Ben Carter was not deterred. He sidestepped, blocking their path. His eyes weren't on Alaric, but on the small, pathetic scene he had just left behind. "We're not here about the Whitman merger, Mr. Thorne," Ben said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden, attentive silence of the square. The onlookers who had been listening to the music were now watching a far more compelling drama unfold. "We're here to ask about your philanthropic work," Ben continued, a razor's edge of sarcasm in his tone. He gestured with his microphone back towards the fountain. "We just saw you make a very generous donation to that struggling street performer. Very noble of you." Alaric's face tightened. He saw the trap. "I believe in giving back to the community," he said, his voice strained. Chloe, sensing the danger, squeezed his arm. "Alaric, let's just go." But Ben Carter delivered the killing blow. He ignored Chloe completely, his gaze locked on Alaric. His voice dropped slightly, becoming more pointed, more lethal. "It's a very touching scene, Mr. Thorne. A man of your stature helping a pregnant woman down on her luck." He paused, letting the words hang in the air before continuing. "But don't you think you should be a little more generous, considering that's your wife?" The question landed with the force of a physical impact. For a split second, there was absolute silence. The only sound was the frantic, incessant click, click, click of the cameras, capturing every nuance of the fallout. Chloe Sterling's perfectly made-up face contorted a mask of confusion, then dawning horror. Her head whipped around, first to Alaric, then to the disheveled performer by the fountain. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene, again the violin, the posture, the familiar shape of the face beneath the terrible wig. What did he say?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Alaric went pale. It was a pallor Amelia had never seen on him, the color of chalk. His suave demeanor shattered like cheap glass. He stared at Ben Carter. Then his gaze shot back to Amelia, who was now slowly, shakily getting to her feet. In that moment, everyone saw it. As Amelia stood, the ill-fitting hoodie couldn't hide the elegant line of her neck or the fine bone structure of her face. The tear tracks on her cheeks caught the light. The woman by the fountain wasn't some anonymous vagrant. The paparazzi surged forward, their focus shifting from Alaric to Amelia, their lenses zooming in on her stunned, grief-stricken face. "Is that true, ma'am? Are you Amelia Rosemont Thorne? Mrs. Thorne, why are you playing on the street? Mr. Thorne, were you aware this was your wife when you threw coins at her? Is that your mistress you're with, sir?" The questions were a brutal, rapid-fire assault. Alaric was trapped. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked from the accusing face of the journalist to the horrified face of his mistress, and finally to the unveiled, tear-streaked face of his wife. The woman he had just publicly scorned, the mother of his unborn child. Amelia stood frozen in the eye of the hurricane. The flashes were blinding, the shouting a deafening roar. She clutched her violin to her chest like a shield. She looked at Alaric, and for the first time she didn't see a powerful tycoon. She saw a small, panicked man, his empire of lies crumbling around him in a storm of his own making. Chloe Sterling finally understood. The color drained from her face. She wasn't his partner in power. She was the other woman caught in the flashbulbs. She looked at Alaric with utter betrayal, then at Amelia with a complex mixture of pity and fury. She took a step back, then another, detaching herself from him as if he were radioactive. Ben Carter. His work done, lowered his microphone slightly, a grim satisfaction in his eyes. He had been investigating Alaric Thorne's ruthless business practices for months, tipped off by a disgruntled former employee. The tip had included whispers of Thorne's crumbling marriage and his cruelty. A long shot had led him here today, a hunch that had paid off more spectacularly than he could have ever imagined. As Alaric stood paralyzed and Chloe began to back away into the crowd, a young man suddenly pushed through the throng of reporters. He was tall with a worried face and the same determined jawline as Amelia. He threw a protective arm around her shoulders. "Ames. Oh God, Ames, it's you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. It was her estranged brother, Liam, a carpenter who lived across the bay, alerted by a friend who had been in the square and recognized Amelia's unique playing style, even in her disguise. He glared at Alaric with pure hatred, then turned to shield his sister from the cameras. "That's enough. Leave her alone," he yelled, guiding the trembling Amelia away from the fountain, away from the wreckage of her husband's life. Alaric Thorne was left alone in the center of the square, surrounded by the merciless glare of the media. The king was naked, the mask was gone, and the entire world was watching. The story didn't just break, it detonated. By evening, it was the lead item on every news channel, the top trending topic on every social media platform. The headlines were brutal and brilliant. The tycoon and the tramp. Billionaire, Alaric Thorne, mocks destitute musician, discovers it's his own pregnant wife. Thorne's humiliation caught with Mistress abusing his socialite wife in disguise. The violinist and the vulture. Amelia Rosemont Thorne's secret life exposes a rotten empire. The paparazzi photos were splashed everywhere, Alaric's smug face as he flicked the coins, Chloe's horrified realization, and the most powerful image of all, Amelia tear-streaked and vulnerable, clutching her violin as the world discovered her identity. Public opinion was swift and merciless. Alaric wasn't just seen as an adulterer, he was a monster, a man who would publicly humiliate a pregnant woman, his own wife, for sport. His carefully curated image of a sophisticated, benevolent leader was incinerated. The board of Thorne Industries convened an emergency meeting. Major investors began calling, their voices laced with panic. The stock, which had been soaring just that morning, was predicted to plummet at the opening bell. Alaric Thorne had built his brand on the illusion of untouchable perfection. Now that brand was toxic. He retreated to the penthouse, but it was no longer a sanctuary. It was a tomb. He smashed a $50,000 vase against a wall, the sound echoing in the cavernous empty space. He tried calling Amelia's phone obsessively, but it went straight to voicemail. He left a string of increasingly desperate messages, their tone shifting from furious demands to pathetic, pleading apologies. "Amelia, pick up the phone. We need to handle this. We can release a statement. Say it was a misunderstanding, a social experiment. Amelia, please, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't know it was you. I would never." His voice would trail off the lie, too blatant even for him to complete. Meanwhile, Amelia was in a place the Thorne money could never touch, her brother's small, cluttered, wonderfully normal apartment in Oakland. The air smelled of sawdust and brewing coffee. Liam, her older brother by 5 years, had always been her protector. They had grown distant after her marriage to Alaric, who viewed Liam's blue-collar life as a carpenter with thinly veiled disdain. But when Liam had seen her in that square, all that distance had vanished. He made her a cup of chamomile tea and wrapped her in a thick, hand-knitted blanket. She sat on his worn sofa, Ophelia, her violin resting safely in its case beside her. She hadn't spoken much since the chaos of the afternoon. She was in shock, the adrenaline giving way to a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. "I saw his face, Liam," she finally whispered, her voice hoarse. "The way he looked at me. Like I was dirt. If the cameras hadn't been there, he never would have known. He would have gone home to our perfect apartment and complained to me about the riffraff in the city." Liam's hands clenched into fists. "He's a bastard, Ames. I've been saying it for years. Now everyone else can see it too." Her phone, which Liam had put on silent, lit up with another call from Alaric. She flinched. "Don't," Liam said gently. "You don't have to talk to him until you're ready, if ever." A knock on the door made them both jump. Liam looked through the peephole, his posture immediately wary. "It's a man in a suit," he said quietly. "Looks like a lawyer." Amelia's heart sank. Alaric had found her. He'd sent his legal attack dogs. Liam opened the door a crack. "We're not interested." "My name is Robert Chen," the man said, his voice calm and steady. He wasn't aggressive. He held up a business card. "I'm not from Mr. Thorne. I'm a senior partner at Sterling, Chen and Associates. I'd like to speak with Mrs. Rosemont Thorne, if she's willing." Amelia recognized the name. Sterling, Chen and Associates was one of the most respected and feared family law firms in the state. "How did you find me?" Amelia asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Ben Carter, the reporter from the Chronicle," Chen explained. "He felt that given the circumstances you might need representation. He gave my office a call. He believes you have a story that deserves to be told, and rights that need protecting." Liam looked at Amelia, who gave a slight, hesitant nod. He let the lawyer in. Robert Chen was the opposite of Alaric. He was understated with kind, intelligent eyes. He sat down and spoke to Amelia, not as a victim or a scandal, but as a client. "Amelia," he said, using her first name with a familiarity that was comforting. "What you experienced today was horrific, but it was also, from a legal standpoint, a gift. You have leverage that is almost unprecedented in a divorce proceeding. Public opinion, moral high ground. It's all yours. Alaric Thorne's greatest asset was his reputation, and you now control it." He laid out a strategy not of revenge, but of liberation. They would file for divorce immediately, citing irreconcilable differences and emotional cruelty. They would take control of the narrative painting, her not as a spurned wife, but as a woman escaping an abusive and controlling marriage, a woman fighting for a safe future for her unborn child. As they talked, something shifted in Amelia. The fear and humiliation began to recede, replaced by a flicker of steel. For 5 years she had been silenced, molded and controlled. Now people were listening. She had a voice. She had allies. Her brother, a determined journalist, a powerful lawyer. Elsewhere in the city, Chloe Sterling was performing her own damage control. She was on the phone with her most trusted crisis manager. "The narrative is that I was duped," she said, her voice cold and pragmatic. "I was misled by Alaric Thorne, just like his wife and his investors. I had no knowledge of the state of their marriage. My professional relationship was manipulated into something personal by a man who is clearly a sociopath. I am a victim here as well." She was cutting her losses, severing all ties with the sinking ship that was Alaric Thorne. Her association with him was now a liability, and Chloe Sterling never held on to a liability. Late that night, Amelia finally looked at her phone. She ignored the dozens of missed calls from Alaric and opened her messages. There was one from an unknown number. "I am so sorry for my part in today. He told me you were separated, that it was over. It's no excuse, but it's the truth. He is a user, and he used us both. Get a good lawyer. Bankrupt him. CS." Amelia stared at the message from Chloe Sterling. It wasn't an apology born of remorse, but of self-preservation, and yet it was also a confirmation, an alliance of the scorned. She deleted the message. She didn't need Chloe's cynical advice. She looked at her brother sleeping on a makeshift bed on the floor to be near her, and at the business card for Robert Chen on the coffee table. She had her own alliance, one built on love and truth. She picked up her violin, not to play, but just to hold it. This instrument had led her into a cage, and now it had given her the key to her freedom. The next battle would be fought not in a public square, but in a courtroom and in the court of public opinion. And for the first time, Amelia felt ready to play her own symphony. The weeks following the Presidio Square incident were not a passing storm for Alaric Thorne. They were a biblical flood. The story had a life of its own, a ravenous entity that fed on every new detail. The initial shockwave of the viral photos gave way to a deeper, more analytical dissection of the Thorne empire. Ben Carter's follow-up articles in the Chronicle were masterpieces of investigative journalism, weaving the public humiliation at the fountain into a larger tapestry of Alaric's ruthless business ethics and toxic leadership. Tabloids screamed with sensational headlines, but it was the quiet, damning opinion pieces in respected financial journals that did the real damage. They spoke of the character clause, the unspoken rule that a CEO whose personal judgment was so spectacularly flawed could not be trusted with shareholder capital. Alaric, cocooned in his penthouse, found that his power had evaporated. The world, which had once bent to his will with a single phone call, was no longer listening. He tried to arrange a softball interview to clear the air, but no reputable journalist would touch it. An old mentor, a grizzled industrialist who had once admired Alaric's ambition, called him. "You didn't just cheat on your wife, son." The old man's voice crackled over the speakerphone. "You showed the world you have no class. You mocked the weak. That's a stain money can't wash out." The board of Thorne Industries, once his loyal disciples, now treated him with a frigid clinical distance. They didn't oust him. The mechanics of that were too complex, but they sidelined him, forming new subcommittees and oversight groups that effectively neutered his authority. He was a king, imprisoned in his own castle, surrounded by wealth that could buy anything but redemption. In stark contrast, Amelia's world began to expand. From the cozy confines of her brother Liam's Oakland apartment, she carefully and with Robert Chen's expert guidance took control of her own story. She agreed to one and only one interview. It was with Ben Carter, conducted not in a sterile TV studio, but at Liam's sturdy oak dining table with mugs of tea between them. She was luminous. Dressed simply, with her hair falling naturally around her shoulders, she spoke with a quiet dignity that was devastatingly effective. She never raised her voice. She didn't have to. "I realized," she told Carter, her hand resting almost unconsciously on her growing belly, "that I had become an echo. My life was about reflecting my husband's success, his ambitions. I had forgotten my own voice. Going to the square that day, it wasn't a cry for help. It was an attempt to hear myself again, to see if the music was still there." When Carter asked about Alaric's actions, she steered away from simple condemnation. What happened that day was a symptom of a much larger problem. She said, her gaze steady. "It's what happens when we start seeing people as objects, as rungs on a ladder, or obstacles in our path. He didn't see a person. He didn't see a woman, or an artist, or an expectant mother. He just saw something beneath him. My hope is not for his ruin, but for a world where we all learn to look a little closer." The interview cemented her status as a figure of grace and strength. She became a symbol for every person who had ever felt small, voiceless, or trapped. Support poured in from every corner, from women's shelters to arts collectives to anonymous strangers who sent letters to the Chronicle addressed simply to the violinist. Finally, the day of the reckoning arrived. The final settlement meeting was held in Robert Chen's 40th floor boardroom, a space of quiet, intimidating power with a panoramic view of the bay. Alaric arrived first, flanked by 3 grim-faced lawyers from a notoriously aggressive corporate firm. He looked thinner, his expensive suit hanging slightly off his frame, his tan unable to hide the dark circles of sleeplessness under his eyes. He was a predator, backed into a corner, radiating a dangerous, volatile energy. Amelia entered minutes later. She walked with a newfound, deliberate grace, her pregnancy no longer a secret vulnerability, but a visible symbol of her future. Beside her was Robert Chen, a picture of calm professionalism, and on her other side, Liam wearing his best jacket, his presence a silent, immovable statement of loyalty. He was her anchor, her connection to the real world she had fought her way back to. Alaric began foregoing pleasantries. "Amelia," he said, his voice a low growl that attempted to mimic his old authority. "This farce has gone on long enough. My lawyers have a settlement offer. It's obscenely generous. You'll be set for 10 lifetimes. In return, you will issue a statement of mutual regret, and this all goes away." Amelia didn't even look at the file his lawyer pushed across the vast mahogany table. She looked directly at her husband. "I'm not interested in your money, Alaric." "Then what is this about?" he snarled, losing his composure. "Revenge. You've had it. My company's stock is in the toilet, and I'm a public laughingstock. Are you satisfied? This isn't about satisfaction." Amelia said, her voice as calm and clear as the glass walls of the room. "It's about consequence." Robert Chen leaned forward slightly. "My client has a counter-proposal, a single, non-negotiable term for this divorce to proceed uncleanly and quietly." Alaric scoffed. "Let's hear it." It was Amelia who spoke, laying out her masterstroke. "I want you to establish a charitable foundation, the Presidio Arts Foundation. You will provide it with a one-time, irrevocable seed endowment of $50 million. The silence in the room was absolute. Alaric's lead lawyer choked on a sip of water. Alaric himself stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. Then he let out a short, barking laugh of disbelief. "50 million? To you, is this a joke? The money doesn't go to me." Amelia clarified, her voice gaining strength. "It will be managed by an independent board which I will appoint. Its mission will be to support struggling artists in this city. It will provide grants for musicians who play on broken instruments, scholarships for talented kids from poor neighborhoods whose parents can't afford lessons, and funding for public arts programs. It will give hundreds of people the chance you tried to mock and extinguish on a whim." The genius of her demand slowly dawned on Alaric's face, replacing his shock with a dark, boiling rage. It was the most perfect trap. If he refused, he was the unrepentant monster proving every bad thing said about him. If he agreed, he would be forced to publicly fund his own atonement, an act of philanthropy born, not of generosity, but of humiliation. His name would be on the checks, but the foundation's soul, its entire narrative, would belong to her. He would be paying to build a monument to his own disgrace. "This is insane," he seethed, turning to his lawyers. "She can't do this." "On the contrary," Robert Chen said smoothly, "she can. Or we can proceed to a very public, very messy trial. We can subpoena your business associates, your staff. Ms. Sterling, perhaps. I wonder what a jury would make of all that." Amelia delivered the final blow. "You once told me that image is everything, Alaric. This is your chance to buy a new one. Consider it penance. You tried to crush something beautiful. Now you will spend a fortune to build something beautiful in its place." Your only legacy from this will be an act of grace you were forced to commit. Alaric Thorne, the titan of industry, the man who bent markets to his will, slumped in his chair. He looked at the serene, unshakable woman across the table, the woman he had once owned, now the architect of his surrender. He was utterly and completely outplayed. "Draw up the papers." He whispered the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. 3 months later, a stage was erected in the middle of Presidio Square, in the exact spot where a discarded wig and a few scattered coins had once lain. The crisp autumn air was filled with music and excited chatter. The inaugural concert of the Presidio Arts Foundation was a resounding success. The board, Amelia had appointed a diverse group of respected artists, community leaders, and educators, watched from the front row. Ben Carter stood nearby, a small, satisfied smile on his face as he took notes. The final performer of the evening was announced. Amelia walked onto the stage. She was not the tragic figure from the news reports, nor the timid woman from the penthouse. She was radiant, her 7-month pregnancy a proud testament to her future. She held Ophelia her violin, and the spotlight illuminated a face filled not with sorrow or anger, but with a profound and lasting peace. She looked out at the crowd, her eyes finding Liam's in the wings. He gave her a thumbs up. She smiled a real, unburdened smile and lifted the violin to her chin. The melody that flowed into the night was not a somber Bach partita or a fiery classical showpiece. It was a simple, soaring folk tune from the Oregon forests of her childhood, a song of hope, of resilience, of rivers thawing after a long winter. The notes were clear, strong, and full of joy. It was the sound of a woman who had not just escaped a key but had learned to build her own world, a world filled with the beautiful, triumphant music of her own soul. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a millionaire's downfall or a salacious public scandal. It's a powerful reminder that our true value is never determined by the labels others place on us, not by wealth, not by status, and not by the gilded cages they might build around us. Amelia's story shows us the incredible strength that lies dormant within waiting for a reason to fight. It proves that authenticity is a superpower, and that the most powerful symphony is the one we play with our own voice in our own time. Alaric Thorne lost his image, his power, and his grace, all because he couldn't see the value in the person standing right in front of him. Amelia, by losing everything she thought she had found, everything that truly mattered. What do you think Alaric Thorne deserved? Would you have been as strong as Amelia? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience and reckoning moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will make you think. Thank you for listening.